Something is already building beneath the surface, and if you are honest with yourself, you can feel it before you can explain it, because in just 2 days, on May 1st, there is a moment forming in the sky that is not distant or abstract. It is intimate. It is aimed directly at the parts of you that you have been trying to manage quietly. And what makes this even more intense is that most people will overlook it. They will treat it like just another alignment, but you will feel it in your body, in your thoughts, in the tightening sensation in your chest, when words rise up and stop halfway, because on that day, precisely at 4 in the afternoon, Mercury comes into exact union with Chiron at 27 degrees of Aries. And even if the language sounds technical, the experience is anything but, because this is not an external event. It is a deeply personal threshold, one that is already pressing against your inner world, asking something from you that you have been postponing, avoiding, or carefully navigating around. And what makes it so complex is that it carries 2 energies at once, one that wants to mend and one that forces you to confront discomfort. So what you are feeling right now, that strange urge to be completely honest, even when it disrupts the image you have been maintaining, even when it risks changing how others see you, that is not random, that is not impulsive, that is the beginning of this transit moving through you. And it is not asking politely, it is creating pressure. Because it is time. And I know a part of you wants to hold back, to stay safe, to keep things controlled. But another part of you is getting louder, more insistent, almost impatient. And that tension between silence and expression is exactly where this moment lives. And before you can understand why it feels so urgent, you need to understand the force behind it, because Chiron is not just a symbol. It is a mirror that reflects something you cannot easily ignore. It carries the story of a being who knew how to heal everyone except himself, a teacher, a guide, someone who held immense knowledge and yet carried a wound that never closed, a wound that stayed with him, not for a moment, but for his entire existence. And this is where it becomes personal for you, because that story is not distant mythology. It is a pattern that exists inside you, that place where you feel not enough, where you question your worth, where you replay moments of being dismissed or misunderstood, where you learned, consciously or unconsciously, that your voice might not be welcome, might not be safe. And over time you adapted, you softened your truth, you filtered your thoughts, you chose silence over conflict, not because you lacked something, but because you were protecting yourself, and yet the wound remained. It did not disappear. It simply became quieter, more internal, shaping how you think, how you speak, how much space you allow yourself to take. And what is important to understand is that this part of you was never meant to be erased. It was meant to be understood, because within that exact point of sensitivity lies a kind of awareness that others do not have, a depth that comes from having felt what it is like to not be heard. And this is where the shift begins. Because when Mercury moves into alignment with Chiron, the focus moves directly into the mind, into language, into expression, and suddenly, the very thing that once felt like the source of your limitation, your voice, your hesitation, your overthinking, becomes the pathway forward. And this is why it feels so intense, because the place that once held your silence is now asking for your truth, and not in a distant future, but now and when you look closer. You may start to notice the pattern more clearly, the moments in your past where you spoke and were shut down, where your words were ignored, where you were told directly or indirectly that what you had to say did not matter. And over time, that creates a belief, a quiet but powerful narrative that shapes how you show up. And now that narrative is being challenged, because this alignment is happening in Aries, the sign that represents your identity, your right to exist, your ability to stand as yourself without apology. And Aries does not negotiate with fear. It does not ask for permission, it declares. It asserts. It exists fully. And when Chiron is here, the wound becomes intertwined with your sense of self. It touches the question of whether you are allowed to take up space, whether you are allowed to be seen as you truly are. And when Mercury meets it in this exact point, the message becomes unavoidable, because the fear that if you speak, you might be rejected. That if you stop adjusting yourself to fit expectations, people might leave. That fear rises to the surface not to control you, but to be seen clearly for what it is, and over the next few days. This is likely to intensify. You may find yourself in situations that trigger it. Directly conversations where you feel the urge to stay quiet, even though something inside you wants to speak. Moments where honesty feels both necessary and terrifying at the same time. And this is where the real turning point begins, because this is not about avoiding the discomfort, it is about moving through it. And the only way this particular pattern transforms is through action, through expression, through choosing to speak even when your voice shakes, even when the outcome is uncertain. Because what is being activated now is not here to break you. It is here to show you that the part of you that once felt like a weakness is actually the doorway to your strength. And as this realization begins to settle, you will start to see why everything has been building toward this moment, and why what comes next is something you cannot afford to ignore. What if the very thing you have spent your entire life trying to avoid is actually the doorway you have been searching for? Because right now something is shifting in a way that is both precise and deeply personal. And to understand it, you need to look at a detail. Most people overlook the symbolic language of each degree in the zodiac, because the moment Mercury and Chiron meet is not random. It is happening at 28 degrees of Aries. And the image associated with this exact point is one that hits straight into the core of your fears. A large audience confronting a performer who failed to meet their expectations. And the first reaction most people have to that image is discomfort. A tightening in the chest, a memory of every moment they felt exposed, judged, or not enough, because it mirrors something primal. The fear of standing in front of others and being seen as inadequate. The fear of being evaluated and found lacking, the fear that everything you present will be met with criticism instead of acceptance. And it almost feels like a nightmare unfolding in front of you. But if you stay with that image a little longer, if you resist the urge to turn away from it, something deeper begins to reveal itself. Because this is not a story about failure in the way you think it. Is a story about the grip that other people's expectations have had on your life finally beginning to loosen. And when you really examine it, you may start to see just how much of your identity has been shaped around trying to avoid that exact moment. How many times you adjusted yourself, softened your truth, held back your real thoughts just to maintain approval, just to keep the audience satisfied. And what makes this even more confronting is the realization that the audience in this symbol is not as external as it seems. It is not only the people around you. It is the voice inside your own mind that has been watching you, correcting you, questioning every move, asking, what will they think? What if this is not enough? What if you disappoint them? And over time, that voice became so familiar that you stopped questioning it. You accepted it as truth, and you built your life around it. But this transit is doing something very specific. It is pulling that voice into the light so you can finally see it clearly. And when you do, you begin to recognize that it is not as powerful as it once felt. It is a projection, a pattern, something learned and reinforced over time, not an absolute reality. And yet it has influenced so many of your choices. And this is why the pressure you have been feeling lately has been so intense. Because even before the exact alignment on May 1st at 4 in the afternoon, the energy has already been building quietly but persistently. And you have likely noticed subtle changes in yourself, moments where you hesitate less, where you feel less willing to filter your words, where something honest slips through before you can stop it, and those moments may have left you feeling exposed, almost as if you revealed too much. Or perhaps you have experienced the opposite, a growing frustration, a sense that there is something inside you that needs to be said, but you keep holding it back, and the longer you hold it, the heavier it becomes. settling in your throat and your chest, creating a kind of pressure that does not fade. And this is not happening without purpose. This is preparation, because what is coming is not abstract, it is a real opportunity. A moment where you will be faced with a choice to continue staying silent or to finally speak. And that choice will not feel easy. It will feel charged, emotional, uncertain. But it will also feel necessary. And what you need to understand is that this is not about saying something harsh or reckless. It is not about reacting impulsively. It is about allowing yourself to be honest in a way that you may have avoided for a long time. Honest about what you feel, what you need, what no longer aligns with you. And the truth itself may take different forms depending on your story. For some, it may be the realization that the life you have been maintaining does not actually reflect who you are, that the role you have been playing, whether in work relationships or identity, no longer feels authentic, and admitting that even to yourself can feel destabilizing because it raises questions about what comes next and how others will respond. For others, the truth may be rooted in something that happened in the past, a moment where your boundaries were crossed, where you were hurt or overlooked, and instead of addressing it, you minimized it, you carried it quietly, convincing yourself it was easier not to speak. But now that memory is returning, not to reopen the pain, but to give you the chance to acknowledge it fully, to name it, to bring it out of silence and into expression. And this is where the real transformation begins, because the act of speaking, of giving language to something you have held inside, changes your relationship to it. It moves it from something that controls you unconsciously into something you can see, understand, and ultimately release. And as this process unfolds, you may start to notice that the fear of disappointing others, the fear that once felt so overwhelming, begins to lose its hold, not because it disappears instantly, but because you are no longer allowing it to dictate your choices. And that is the shift that changes everything. Because once you experience what it feels like to speak from a place of truth rather than fear, even once you cannot fully return to the old pattern, and as this realization deepens, you will begin to understand why this moment is not just another transit passing through, but a turning point that is leading you directly into the next phase of your journey. There is a layer to this that goes even deeper than anything we have touched so far. And if you allow yourself to be completely honest for just a moment, you may already sense where this is pointing in your own life. Because for some of you, the truth rising now is not about another person at all. It is about you. It is about something you have known quietly for a long time, but never fully admitted, something about your identity, your desires, your needs, something that does not fit the version of yourself you believed you had to maintain. And that is exactly why it has been pushed aside, softened or denied, because it felt easier to preserve the image than to confront what did not align with it. But this moment is not allowing that avoidance to continue. It is creating the exact conditions where that truth cannot remain hidden any longer. And yes, there is discomfort in that. There is fear in that. But what you are beginning to realize is that the cost of silence has been far greater than the risk of honesty. Because every time you held something in, every time you chose not to say what you felt, a part of you stayed unresolved, and that unresolved energy does not disappear. It accumulates, it lingers, it shapes how you move through your life. And this is why the act of speaking now is not just expression. It is release. It is healing. It is reclaiming something that has been withheld, and depending on where this alignment touches your chart, that release takes on a very specific form. If you are Aries, or if Aries is prominent for you, this energy moves directly through your sense of self. It asks you to stop shrinking, to stop apologizing for your presence, to stop negotiating your identity for the comfort of others, and to stand in who you are without dilution if you are Taurus. This unfolds in a quieter but equally powerful way within the hidden layers of your mind, where patterns you may not even consciously acknowledge are being brought forward, asking you to finally name the fears you have been carrying internally and give them a voice so they no longer control you from the shadows. If you are Gemini, the focus shifts into your social world, your friendships, your sense of belonging, where honesty may disrupt the surface harmony you have maintained, but in doing so reveals what is truly aligned and what is not. If you are Cancer, this reaches into your public life, your career, your direction, where the truth may involve acknowledging that the path you are on no longer reflects who you are becoming, and having the courage to say that out loud, even if it changes how others see you. If you are Leo, this expands into your beliefs, your understanding of the world, where something you once accepted without question is now being challenged, asking you to articulate a shift that may feel both liberating and destabilizing at the same time. If you are Virgo, this moves into the most intimate layers of your connections, where vulnerability is required, where you may need to speak about trust, about emotional depth, about the dynamics that exist beneath the surface of your closest relationships. If you are Libra, this becomes a direct conversation within a partnership where maintaining peace is no longer enough, and you are being asked to express what you truly need, even if it creates tension in the moment. If you are Scorpio, this energy shows up in your daily life, your routines, your work, your well-being, where the truth may involve recognizing that something in your current pattern is unsustainable and needs to change. If you are Sagittarius, this moves into your creativity and your heart, where expression has been blocked or withheld. And now there is a need to be honest about what you feel, what you desire, what you want to create or experience. If you are Capricorn, this reaches into your home, your roots, your family, where something that has been unspoken for a long time is ready to surface, asking for acknowledgement so it can finally shift. If you are Aquarius, this plays out in your immediate environment, your conversations, your daily interactions, where honesty may be required in places you have previously kept things light or unspoken. And if you are Pisces, this touches your sense of worth, your value, where the truth may involve recognizing that you have been giving more than you receive, accepting less than you deserve, and now being asked to speak up for your own value in a way that you may have avoided before. And when you step back and look at all of this, you begin to see the pattern. Wherever this alignment lands, that is where the conversation needs to happen. That is where the healing is waiting. And this is why what you are experiencing feels so precise, so personal, because it is. And what makes this moment even more charged, even more transformative, is that it is not unfolding in isolation. It is supported and intensified by other movements happening at the exact same time, because on that same day, May 1st, there is also a full moon in Scorpio, amplifying emotional depth, bringing hidden truths to the surface, and just before Mercury meets Chiron Venus, forms a harmonious connection with Saturn, adding a layer of seriousness, commitment, and reality to everything that is being revealed. Which means this is not just about feeling something and letting it pass. This is about recognizing something real and deciding what you are going to do about it. And as all of these energies begin to intertwine, you can feel the momentum building towards something that is no longer avoidable, something that is asking you not just to understand, but to act. And that is exactly where the next part of this journey begins. If you've been wondering why everything feels like it is building toward a single moment, this is where it all begins to make sense, because what is forming around you right now is not just one influence. It is a convergence, a carefully layered sequence that creates the perfect environment for something deep to surface and finally be released. And at the center of it is that Scorpio full moon, pulling emotional material up from places you do not usually access, drawing out memories, feelings, and truths that have been sitting quietly beneath your awareness. Things you thought you had already moved past, or things you never fully allowed yourself to feel in the first place. And what makes Scorpio energy so intense is that it does not skim the surface. It goes directly into the core, into the hidden spaces where fear, desire, pain and truth are intertwined, and as this illumination happens, it can feel overwhelming, like everything is rising at once. But at the same time, there is another current moving alongside it, because Venus, forming that supportive connection with Saturn, introduces a completely different tone, one that is steady, grounded, and mature, almost like a calm presence that says you can handle what is coming up. You can respond with integrity. You can take responsibility for your emotions and your relationships without collapsing under the weight of them. And when you combine these two forces, the emotional exposure of the full moon and the stabilizing discipline of Venus with Saturn, you begin to see how intentional this moment really is. Because right as all of that reaches its peak, Mercury aligns with Chiron and shifts everything into expression. It does not allow what you are feeling to remain internal. It asks you to translate it, to give it language, to bring it out of the realm of sensation and into the realm of declaration. And that is where the real turning point happens, because feeling something and naming it are not the same. And once you name it, once you say it out loud, it becomes real in a different way. It becomes something you can no longer ignore or contain. And this is why this combination holds such immense potential for transformation. Because it is not just about awareness, it is about action. It is about taking what has been hidden and giving it form through your voice. And what is almost surprising about this is how simple the pathway to healing actually is, because it does not require complexity. It requires honesty, a level of honesty that feels uncomfortable precisely because it has been avoided. And that is the paradox here. The very thing you have been afraid to do is the exact thing that begins to release the hold this wound has had on you. And when Mercury connects with Chiron, communication itself becomes the tool that opens the process. Your words become precise, intentional, almost like an instrument that cuts through layers of silence and suppression, and as long as something remains unspoken, it continues to circulate inside you. It shapes your reactions, your decisions, your sense of self. But the moment you allow it to be expressed, something shifts, not because the past changes, but because your relationship to it changes. And what once felt overwhelming begins to lose its ability to control you. And this is not theoretical. This is something you can feel in real time, because when you finally say what you have been holding, there is often an immediate sense of release, a lightness that follows as if a weight you had become accustomed to carrying is suddenly no longer there. And it may not resolve everything instantly. It may not even go the way you imagined, because the truth is that when you speak honestly, you cannot control how others respond. They may resist it. They may not understand. They may even step away. And that can be painful. But there is also a deeper clarity that emerges from that experience, because it reveals which connections can hold your truth and which ones cannot. And that distinction is essential for where you are going next, because this moment is not just about expression. It is about liberation. It is about stepping out of the exhausting pattern of shaping yourself to meet expectations and instead allowing yourself to exist as you are without constant adjustment. And while that may change certain dynamics in your life, it also opens the door for something more genuine to take their place, connections that are based on authenticity rather than performance. And as this process unfolds, you may begin to notice another shift, one that is quieter, but just as significant, because once you have experienced what it feels like to speak your truth, even imperfectly, even with uncertainty, you begin to recognize that you are capable of holding that space for others as well. Your own vulnerability becomes a point of connection, a way of understanding what others are going through. And this is where the deeper meaning of this transit reveals itself. The wound that once felt isolating becomes a source of insight, something that allows you to relate, to support, to guide. And as we move past the exact alignment on May 1st, the story does not end there, because the days that follow are where integration begins on May 2nd. Mercury shifts into Taurus, and that change in energy is important, because it takes everything that was intense, immediate and raw in Aries, and begins to ground it, to stabilize it, to bring it into practical reality. And this is where you start asking yourself how to live with this new level of honesty, how to incorporate it into your daily interactions, your routines, your choices, how to maintain that alignment with yourself, not just in one conversation, but consistently. And this is where the next phase unfolds, where what you have realized and expressed begins to take shape in a tangible way, guiding you into a different way of being that continues to build from this moment forward. There is one final piece to this that you cannot afford to overlook, because what begins on May 1st does not end. There, it evolves, it builds, and it asks more of you. And if you pay attention, you will see that exactly 2 weeks later, on May 16th, Mars reaches the same point, the exact same degree where Mercury met Chiron. And this is where everything you said, everything you admitted, everything you finally allowed yourself to express is no longer just an idea or a moment of courage. It becomes a test of alignment, because Mars is not about reflection. It is about action. It is about movement. It is about proving through behavior what you have already declared through words. And this is why this period carries so much weight, because it is not a single event. It is a sequence, a progression that moves you from awareness into embodiment. The first phase asks you to speak, to break the silence, to release what has been held inside. And the second phase asks you to live it, to stand by it, to make choices that reflect the truth you revealed. And when you see it this way, you begin to understand that you are being given a window, a focused period where change is not only possible, it is supported. Almost guided week 1 is about finding your voice. Week 2 is about proving to yourself that your voice matters. And together they create something that lasts beyond this moment, something that reshapes how you move forward. And yet, as powerful as this is, it would not be honest to pretend that it feels easy. Because for many of you, the moment you think about speaking openly, your body reacts before your mind can rationalize it. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts race, your nervous system becomes alert as if something dangerous is about to happen. And in a way, it makes sense, because the part of you that fears rejection interprets it as a threat to your safety, something ancient and instinctive, something that tells you if you disappoint others, you might lose connection. And if you lose connection, you might not survive. And even though you logically know that is not how your life works now, the response is still there. It is real, it is physical, and it deserves to be acknowledged rather than dismissed, because you are not overreacting. You are responding to something deeply wired within you, and that is exactly why this moment matters so much, because it is not about eliminating fear. It is about moving through it with awareness, understanding that courage is not the absence of that reaction. It is the decision to act in alignment with your truth, even while that reaction exists, and when the moment comes. And it will come. It may not look dramatic from the outside. It may be a simple conversation, a sentence, a boundary, a choice, but internally it will feel significant. Because you will recognize that point where staying silent begins to hurt more than speaking, where holding it in feels heavier than the risk of letting it out. And that is the signal, that is the shift. That is when you know you are ready. And this is really what this entire experience has been leading you toward, the realization that you no longer have to perform, that you no longer have to shape yourself to meet expectations that were never fully yours to begin with. Because if you look back honestly, you can see how much energy has gone into maintaining that version of yourself, how much effort it has taken to anticipate reactions, to manage impressions, to avoid disappointing others. and how exhausting that has been over time. And this moment offers you something different. It offers you the choice to step out of that cycle, to let the imagined audience react however it will, and to stand in something more real. Because the version of you that was built around approval was never meant to last. It was always a temporary structure, something that would eventually crack under its own weight. And what is emerging now is not a new identity you have to create. It is the one that has been there all along. The one you have sensed but not fully expressed. And that truth you keep thinking about. The one you hesitate to say out loud. It is not something you need to search for. It is already within you. It has been present for a long time, waiting for the moment when you are willing to acknowledge it. And this transit is simply removing what has been in the way, the hesitation, the excuses, the fear of how it will be received. And when that moment arrives, when you feel the pressure rise and the words come forward, the invitation is simple, even if it feels difficult. Say them, allow them to exist outside of you, even if your voice is unsteady, even if the outcome is uncertain, because what waits on the other side of that expression is not just a reaction from others, it is a shift within yourself, a sense of lightness, of alignment, of no longer carrying something that was never meant to stay hidden. And that version of you, the one who is not performing, the one who is not holding back, the one who is living in truth rather than in fear, that version is closer than you think. And as you move through this process, you will begin to see that the discomfort was not something to avoid. It was something that led you directly to where you needed to be. And if you have stayed with this journey all the way to this point, then you already know this is not just information. It is something you are meant to experience, so take care of yourself as you move through it. Be patient with the parts of you that feel uncertain, and remember that this is not about perfection, it is about honesty. And I will see you as you continue into what comes next.